the Overman Warrior Podcast.
All right, I talked about this book the other day, and I had a chance to go read it. Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars by David Flynn. Okay, so if it wasn't for Timothy Alberino, I probably wouldn't have read this. This was a self-published book back in the day. I have a collection, and I have a lot of people. I wrote years ago an article on giants, newspaper articles that indicated there were giants found in mounds in Ohio. And I have since watched a lot of people rise and fall. They get hot on a trail. They could do some research, and then their wings burn off, and they fall back to Earth. Never quite escaping. Maintaining escape velocity from conspiracy theory into science, and then respectable science at that. So, if not for Timothy Alberino, who I think is doing some of the greatest work out there right now, there's a whole lot of people. He's following a chain of people, and he probably thinks I'm interacting with him because I find him very refreshing. He's a great adventurer. He's a great personality. I've come to like him a lot. I've read his books, since I read his book Birthright. But he's kind of I think an extension, a next generation of Michael Heiser, who went and did some really, really good work connecting scripture to what used to be just categorized in the New Age book section at a bookstore. When you go look at Graham Hancock and certainly Zachariah Ascension and Eric von Daniken, they're always in I call them the kook categories, although I don't find any of them kooks. I enjoy all their work. We're asking questions and are reporters of that dialogue. But it's always been kind of New Age. But there's been this turn where scripture and science are proving each other, and that's a big switch. And I saw it start to turn. Looks like it started to turn with David Flynn. So I would have not, as a self-published book, as this was back then, 2001, I think. I wouldn't have given it a chance. Now I self-published books too. And I understand the skepticism people have. I think there's a lot of merit. There's an editorial quality behind a published book, but then there's also the washout that goes through the editorial process. And I've published books that have been through publishers, and they have their own editors, and they'll tell you not to do this or that. We'll whitewash the narrative, and they'll give you suggestions. And you start off with a manuscript that's 2,000 or 230,000 words, and they'll whittle it down to 60-some thousand words to get into something they think they can sell on a bookshelf. So it's hard to write. The publishing industry has changed a lot. Amazon has had a lot of benefit to that because now books can get out there even if they have just a little obscure audience. But because of Timothy Alberino and some online podcasts like the Blurry Creatures, these guys have evolved, and there's been a quiet movement in a small corner of the internet that is really seriously bringing continued work that people like Michael Heiser have worked in and done some fantastic work of aligning scripture to to discovered science. So sometimes, and people who are very intelligent, very exceptional intelligence, and I think that David Flynn is one of those people, high IQ people who are way outside, way out in front of a given movement, and no publisher in the world would touch them, but the world catches up to them. So because of Timothy Alberino and a cast of characters, Timothy Alberino did a foreword for this. And if you see, Timothy Alberino's done a number of podcasts, and I discovered him recently, and it's another one of those, I'm really hesitant on some of those kinds of people because they fall in the New Age category. Well, these aren't New Age people, but talking about UFOs and Bigfoot, and they're fun topics to consider. I always loved John Keel, the Mothman guy, but you go down that rabbit hole, and you get thrown in the New Age category in the obscure corner of the library and bookstore part of outside the loop mainstream. So I didn't pay much attention to Timothy Alberino until I saw him on a few podcasts I just happened to run across. He's been on the War Room, and he's been on a few others, and I thought, I'm going to check this guy out. And eventually he published his book Birthright in 2020. It was during COVID. I think I had it on my list, and I just didn't get around to it because I was involved in all the political stuff, and there's political stories galore when trying to get Trump back in the White House and dealing with big topics that dealt with COVID and mask mandates and CDC's conspiracies. There's plenty of conspiracies to go around. I didn't get to talk about my favorite topic, which is giants and the Nephilim and all that. But I start off by saying I know a lot of those kinds of self-published people who have went out and done some great work on the Nephilim, and they contact me and they send me clips, and they're always commenting on my X account. Back then it was Twitter, and telling me all these discoveries they're making on their independent journeys, and to go out and go to all these mounds and chronicle them. A lot of smart people who were out there, and I think David Flynn was one of them. And he published this obscure book, and it essentially talks about the secret Chronicles of Mars. And it says that a lot of the myths that we have, and if you do study the mythology, it traces it all back to Cydonia, which is the area of Tyre, just outside where Mount Hermon, where an entry point from these fallen angels came in and brought civilization with them, and everything just went poof. And you start having Sumer, and you start having Egypt and Indus Valley, and very old cultures that were giant people that were in the Near East at the time, and they were the people that had to be taken over by the Jewish people, and Yahweh's crusade to return, to put his people in that land and take it over, essentially, from the occupants that had sinned and caused so much destruction. And a lot of people consider that to be a story, but more and more we're finding out evidence of that corresponds to actual science. So when David Flynn and his, I think, a very high IQ approach to studying the mythology of the Mediterranean region, the Greeks, the Romans, Egyptians, of course, even internationally, the Americas, China, but really kind of centering around how things in very ancient times spiraled out from the Near East region. And the evidence may be lost to archaeology because it's long degraded and been thrown aside by the destructive process of wars and civilization, and buried deep under the surface now. We have enough evidence now to start asking questions about the age of things, and that things are probably a lot older than we thought they were. But what his approach is that a culture from Mars that had to flee the planet and came to Earth as a refuge brought with them stories that ended up becoming the mythology of ancient civilization. And it starts corresponding with biblical text. and that would have been kooky, really kooky. A lot of people say it's kooky now. I don't think so. I don't think it's kooky at all. I think we're uncovering through literature and through other means that science hasn't caught up to yet, because it's either deeply buried or it's politically hidden by finance trying to stay in power, what keeps certain aspects of society ruling over others. There's a lot of people don't want to give that up. They certainly, and they do that in China to this day. There's pyramids, large mounds, lots of archaeology in China that is completely not being explored, because China they don't want a sense of history. They want to be history. And you're finding that all over the world, where elements of this kind of narrative are buried because there are elements that want to stay in power. They want you to only know of them. They don't want any element of previous history to be part of the public consciousness. So what David Flynn has done here, I think, is proved beyond reasonable doubt that a lot of the ancient myths that suddenly appeared, I would say that some of that comes from ultra-terrestrial communications through drug-induced experiences, ayahuasca, for instance. And the characters that are interacted with at a subconscious level, going all the way back to the cave paintings of France and of other places, where just the use of hallucinogenic drugs, speaking with elements that exist in that realm, call it spiritual, whatever you want to call it, certainly has a shared background in how religions and histories formed and correspond over remote parts of the world. But then you have UFO phenomena and back and forth exchanges that are, again, we're talking about disclosure and what Trump's going to release and how far back it goes and what role did they play, and where do we ultimately come from? And more, the more you dig into it, and I think that one of the reasons I want to go to Mars is I think it's interesting to go do some archaeology there. I think we're going to find civilization. Might not be the root of civilization on Mars. It might just be a stepping stone from other places, but that the arrival to Earth, there may have been people always here. There may have been some sort of evolutionary period of creatures that resembled humans that were tweaked or made or created. And then there might be just people who came from other places, and they came and settled Earth. And as much as everyone wanted to say Zechariah Ascension was crazy, I don't think he was that crazy. I think he looked at what the evidence showed, and he made conclusions based on the first questioning on the deep dive of the root cause analysis of the origins of civilization. And he was asking honest questions. But I think David Flynn in this book went several steps further, and I think he's really on to something that we're going to discover when we get to Mars. And we're going to Mars. And I think the rate of disclosure that's happening now is because commercial aerospace has made it so that we're going to be on Mars, we're going to be on the moon, we're going to be in space a lot, and it's going to shatter a lot of the control mechanisms of the dialogue we've had. And now that the advent of communication, I don't think it's gone the way that planners thought it would go. I think it's gotten out of control for them, and that the technology they created is turning out to be their destruction, because any suppression of information that people had is now being blown apart. And we have access to more facts and figures than we ever had. And when you get somebody who's really high IQ, really smart, like David Flynn obviously was, and he had access to early days of the internet and was able to talk to other people, and everyone was able to share experiences, and they weren't They weren't removed by distance. They could talk openly at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And you could take all that stuff and compare it to someone who reads encyclopedias like dime novels, which he was, that kind of guy. And it all starts clicking together, and you happen to write a book, and you don't care who publishes it. You just write it down and self-publish it, and it gets out there, and it develops a following. A very intricate, very specific following, and then it picks up the interest of somebody who's a young adventurer like Timothy Alberino, who's obviously came into the world of adventure and history uniquely, and he has a scriptural background, and certainly not a New Age guy. He's certainly migrating out of this branch that is evolving in a healthy way towards applying scripture to history in truthful, definable ways. And he ran across this book, and it inspired him, and he's been a part of getting it republished, and now it's put out. It's a legitimately published book that has been well put together. It's got some great stuff in it. I'd say it's, when Timothy Alberino says it's one of the top books the human race has ever put together. I've read a lot of books. I would say that it's not an unfair statement. There's works of genius in here that come from obscurity, and it's now available to a mass public. And I can't recommend it more, because we're getting ready to uncover a whole lot as we get into space. And my interest in space travel isn't necessarily to leave the Earth or leave the Garden of Eden that God wanted mankind, to take control of the Earth and have dominion over it, to bring heaven to Earth and be his representatives. My interest in going to space is to prove that there were the archaeology we're discovering just with fragments here on Earth. It will be so much easier without a society built upon the ruins to go to Mars and say, yeah, there's some stuff, here's some pyramids, here's the same stuff that they had, same architectural design that was on Baalbek, and yes, there's mounds all over the place, and the same mound culture is what was mimicked on Earth with mounds all over the world. From Stonehenge to the Miami River Valley, Serpent Mound, all the secret societies that have been out there, the mystery schools that have tried to suppress that knowledge so they can, preserve it in their own way, keep it from the masses of society. It's too stupid to accept it. It's what they told themselves because they wanted to maintain knowledge that gave them some benefit over the rest of their peers. That's essentially what you get from mystery schools that have been repressing this information, trying to keep them getting out. So David Flynn put out a book that really gets into the weeds. It's marvelously written. It is certainly dense, and it's the work of a genius. And it takes early success, like somebody like a Timothy Alberino, to put his name behind it and say, look, this is important, this inspired me. Go out and read it, and here, I'm going to put my name behind it, and let's republish it and get it out there to a new generation. And now it's out in 2026, just came out. As soon as I saw it come open, I got it and read it, and I actually read it a few times to kind of let it sink in. And my report is that it's an astonishing book that really, I think, helps prepare people for the inevitable result of disclosure, which is happening. And that's going to be whatever Trump reveals. That's not the important part. It's when you start going to these celestial bodies and find out we've been there before. And that we are who we are because we came from those places, and we brought the stories with us, even if the archaeology hasn't caught up. And it'll be very easy to go across the surface of Mars in its wrecked condition, and it's stripped away water, and it's destroyed atmosphere, and see preserved pretty well the remnants of a civilization that's probably more than 10,000 years old, or 20,000 years old, or 400, 500,000 years old. And part of our collective subconscious, we know it, we've wrote science fiction stories about it. We contemplated it. It's an itch in the back of our neck. It's always been there, and we're going to align that itch to actual science. We're going to be on the surface soon, building habitats, and we're going to have to say, yeah, we have to redefine our history because this stuff's not supposed to be here. Here's evidence that there was intelligent life here, and there's also evidence that that intelligent life ended up on Earth and built the history that we all know, and it's captured in bits in Scripture that survived over a long period of time, which is a miracle that it even happened at all. And there's a lot of other books, especially if you get into the Dead Sea Scrolls, that point to this ultimate reality and the knowledge that people from a long time ago reporting history from their perspective of a long time ago tell bits and pieces of that lost past. And someone like David Flynn was able to take all that, put it into a cohesive narrative that tells of the secret chronicles of Mars and how they ended up on Earth as the last remnants of a survival. And we lived on here in ways that we even survived to ask this question and to write books like this. But I think it's going to shadow the reality of a lot of people, but that's probably good. And you probably need to do it before you find out through mass media. You need to come to it on your own terms. And I've thought for a long time, I think after reading David Flynn's book, that there's enough evidence to certainly substantiate that we're going to get to Mars, find out ancient civilization was thriving, the whole planet was inhabited, and they left and came to Earth or came from other places. There's a lot of interesting stories about the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars, and how all these elements ended up as the names of gods in Roman and Greek society and other societies of Crete. The whole Minoan culture, it all makes sense when you start looking at it from a culture that brought great tragedy with it, just to survive, and the stories that were told ended up reclassified into either astrology or mythology, and then gradually into religious text that captured it in a bottle for the future to preserve in ways that were never thought possible. And yet here we are. So this is a big book. And I'm talking about Timothy Alberino. He did with the Blurry Creatures guys podcast a redo of the Book of Enoch, which is definitely, I've always thought that it should have been in the Bible. It makes a lot more sense when you apply it to biblical narrative as something that was part of the Genesis text pre-Noah. It should have always been in there, but wasn't for a whole lot of reasons, I'm sure. And I just read it. It is absolutely jaw-dropping good. There's been other books of Book of Enoch that survived out there, but we're in an age where we're getting this information in accelerated ways, and there's a few people that can handle it, and those who can, I suggest reading this. There's a hard copy version of it that I'm going to get, because this is a great book, and it takes a little bit to think it over. It's not ready for mass society yet, but mass society is going to have to get ready and prepare themselves for completely rethinking about the origins of the human race, and the power structures that built what we do know now are all going to be thrown out the window. And I think that's good. They're not happy about it, but we're, again, in the age of disclosure. It's not just a political thing from the Trump administration. It's every understanding we've had has to go through the root cause analysis of actual science has to be applied. And while you're waiting for the archaeology to catch up, and you're waiting for hostile regions to stabilize so that you can actually go dig in places like Iran and Afghanistan and and go find things that are there that have always been there but couldn't get to them because the governments of the world were destabilized. We're seeing a unification effort of that destabilization falling apart, and now the books like this are getting second life under true publishing conditions, and this is legitimate. This has a legitimate backing from a group of people that are very smart and have done a lot of great work into this and spent most of their lives, all their lives, thinking about it, day in, day out. And we had the benefit of being able to pick it up and getting what they've worked hard to put together, so that we can then take that information and do something very constructive with. And I think with this, the political order of our age is about to be shattered with the reality that Mars isn't part of our future as much as it was a major part of our past. And we're going to discover all that very soon when we land there and start creating habitats and exploring science with a fresh look, without the pretension of the institutions that have failed us in their guarded secrets that they've maliciously used to keep power for their own selfish reasons for far too long. And that's all coming to an end. And I think it's wonderful. And books like this, you can only say we are lucky to live in a culture where books like this can be made. And people can actually go think about the things that make a book like this happen. Because it's important to the psychology of humanity to contemplate these kinds of things in ways that only humans can. And it's a wonderful experience. And I really, really, really love this book. And I highly recommend it. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you ever read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. There's a lot of interesting things out there to think about. We're going to explore them in great detail because that's kind of what's required of the times we're living in. So anyway, have a good day. See you later.
Thank you for listening.